The 10th Doctor. This was probably the hardest set of episodes to rank because Tennant's era was just concentrated quality. When I was a child, this was our guy. The Doctor who took us through New Who's golden age. So summarising it down to just 5 picks is really difficult. This is all my own opinion, so before I begin, go and comment your favourite 10th Doctor stories down below, and whilst you're down there, be sure to subscribe. Now, don't worry, I won't be spoiling anything, and as well as that, here are some of my honourable mentions. The Impossible Planet / the Satan Pit, Midnight, and Planet of the Ood. And with all that said, let's get on to the video. Allons-y! First up, we have the big return of the Cybermen, and thank God they got the Cybermen right. Are the Cybermen a little bit too robotic? Yeah, but you can still see the whole idea of them being cyborgs implemented here. There's some really great horror in this, and there's also quite a lot of tension thanks to some great directing and some really good acting as well. I think there are a lot of iconic Cybermen moments here, and I think it's probably the best the Cybermen are ever dealt with in New Who. But whilst we're on that, I guess I should address that the Cybermen have a completely different origin to the one that they have in the classic series. However, I think this actually benefits the story more than it hinders it, as it allows them to link back to all the themes that they were doing in the 60s and just update them. In particular, I think the idea of parallel worlds, it hasn't really been done to this scale yet. And I actually think it was really unique and really well explored. There are some great visuals in this one, and a lot of what they do with the characters is really the emotional crutch. I love how they explore Mickey and Rose in these episodes, and it's nice to see that various things that happen in this episode come back later on across the seasons and across the show. All of the characters felt like they had something to do, and because of that it was actually really engaging. The themes of that technology and its control over the society are still really relevant today, as we can mostly see from the conversations between the Doctor and Lumic, which by the way are probably some of the highlights here. I think John Lumic was a great villain, and his fate at the end made a lot of sense and just cemented what the writers were trying to say with this two-parter. Just overall, it was a really engaging story, it was really out there, and it brought back the Cybermen in such a satisfying way. I liked the overall atmosphere this story had, and as well as that, I really liked that it had meaningful consequences for its characters and for the story, and it made total sense whenever it did that. I just appreciate what it was trying to do, and I think that the overall tone of this story was really done right. Oh, this is going to be a controversial pick, so let's quickly explain why Blink is not number 1. I adore this episode, but it's not really a typical Doctor Who episode, which is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness on this ranking. Its characters are really good. In particular, I thought Sally was a really investing main character, and I also thought Larry was a nice side character. I think the way that the two bounce off each other was really fun, and I also like that it took its time to develop those characters before properly moving into the plot. The Weeping Angels, this is obviously their first appearance, and they are done really well. They are terrifying in this story. This is seriously one of the scariest Doctor Who episodes out there, especially of David Tennant's run. The directing, acting, and music are all fantastic, and they really add to this tense atmosphere. There's a real sense of tension in this story, given, you know, the way that they sort of fit into the plot. Speaking of the plot, it should be really generic, but it just works. The idea of this stone thing that only moves when you're not looking at it, and it sends you back in time, should have been like a really by-the-numbers story, but it just feels so fresh, because it basically takes the Doctor out of the story and puts it in the hands of a different character. And because of that, it just feels like a breath of fresh air. The Doctor's role in this story is perfect. I really like how the story messes in time, and I think it's actually a really cleverly told story as well. It's just not about the Doctor, it's just more of a Doctor Who spin-off, which is really why it's not higher, but it still feels very distinctly Doctor Who, yet also different as well. It's just a really intense story with brilliant writing and a fantastic new villain. When I was binging Tenrun, this is the one where he properly clicked as the Doctor for me. It's laser focused on the 10th Doctor and how he deals with the people he meets and how he solves the problem he gets into. I think in terms of directing, it's really good, its production design is awesome, and its pacing is actually really good as well. The way it deals with time travel really well connects us to Tennant's Doctor. Speaking of which, Tennant is absolutely fantastic in this episode. It's probably one of his greater performances across his run, and it mainly shines out in some of the more tragic or darker moments. But whilst I say that, there's also some really great comedic moments in here as well. And admittedly, there isn't that strong of a villainous threat or a strong danger, but the story isn't trying to do that. It's not really traditional Doctor Who at all, yet it completely is. It's like a Greek tragedy about the Doctor inside of Doctor Who. And the way it explores grief and distance is so well executed. As a whole, this episode is just really well made and really well written. And as a whole, it's just fantastically handled. It's an episode that we really needed across Doctor Who, as it humanised Ten so perfectly, whilst also being a very traditional yet visceral episode of the show. Coming in second place, we have the penultimate 10th Doctor story, and I think that this story is where he really loses. I would say that the Time Lord Victorious moment is probably the best 10th Doctor moment ever, but as well as that, it just stands out as a phenomenal base under siege story. I think that the Flood were a fantastic villain, and they added a lot of really great tension and genuine terror to the story. But as well as that, supporting cast are great, and they're all pretty well defined, in particular Lindsay Duncan, who gives a fantastic performance. Tennant is once again great, and the way it explores his power complex and his determination to save people no matter what the cost is so damn interesting. There's a lot of really strong tension across the story, and its production design, music, and editing, all great. One thing I noticed here is how amazing a lot of the effects look. I think that the cinematography is top notch. I just think that this is such a rich looking Doctor Who episode, and the way that its story has been told is just fantastic. Its ending is phenomenal, and the consequences for Ten's character are just great. I think this story absolutely earns its place in the Hall of Fame for being one of the most memorable and one of the best 10th Doctor stories. It's got a mixture of a fantastic script and an amazing crew working on it to really make something special. And taking the top spot, we have Silence at the Library / Rise of the Dead. Yep, this is the third appearance of a Moffat story on this list, but to be fair, this is seriously the best that Stephen Moffat can do. The Vash Narada were an amazing presence, as they were such a dangerous and deadly foe, but they were also limited to rules, which not only made them an interesting presence, but also a pretty damn terrifying one. I'd argue this is actually probably one of the scariest Doctor Who stories ever, definitely the scariest of Tennant's run. I think that the pacing is great, and it just builds an incredibly tense atmosphere, with clear stakes that it brings in, killing off characters quickly, but as well as that, it does it so unceremoniously to a point where you really don't know what's going to happen next. The directing, cinematography, and editing are all top notch here. I think the use of the Clouds database storyline was really well interwoven into the plot. I think the story also used Donna really well. The story just, despite being this mortifyingly horrific story, still managed to find a lot of heart in it, and I think it mainly comes from Donna's link to the story. As well as that, I just think that the characters as a whole are really fleshed out. In particular, of course, River Song. This was her first appearance, and she's awesome in this. Her moments with Ten are great, and the idea of her is such a clever idea. Her ending and the 10th Doctor's subsequent actions at the end of it were so emotionally resonant, and as a whole, for a story as scary and as concept-based as this, the fact that it had this much heart and emotional strength, I think really elevates the story. It also did a really good job balancing so many new ideas into one investing story. It's just a blueprint of what I see Doctor Who as. It has everything. It's got great characters, great storytelling, a great story, a great villain. It's just phenomenal. In fact, whenever I ask people what their favourite 10th Doctor story is, most of them will say Silence at the Library / Forest of the Dead, and I think that is with good reason. And that's the end of another Doctor Who video. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know your favourites down below. And also, in the comments, let me know whether you'd rather see the 2nd Doctor, Patrick Troughton, next, or the 3rd Doctor, John Pertwee, next. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, like and comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.